A quiet street in the suburbs of London on a chilly autumn morning. No one could have guessed that this place was about to become the scene of one of the most shocking murders in Britain in the 2000s. As the sun was just beginning to rise, a neighbor stepped outside and suddenly noticed the pale legs of a young woman sticking out from behind a garbage bin. On the concrete driveway, smeared with blood, her slender body lay motionless, clothes disheveled, her neck and abdomen covered in stab wounds. Just hours earlier, she had been laughing, enjoying a weekend night out with her friends. But in a matter of moments, everything came to a violent end. An unknown predator, a fleeting moment of fate, and the bright future of that young woman was brutally torn apart. This is the story of a murder that shook the entire nation of England, and the nearly 2-year-long pursuit to finally uncover the real killer. By the way, before we dive into the details, I'd really like to know, where are you watching from? Is it morning, afternoon, or evening where you are? And what's the weather like today? Let me know in the comments below. I always take time to read what you share, and it truly means a lot to me. And if you enjoy real stories like this, told slowly and in detail, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss any of the stories coming next. Thank you for being here. And now, let's begin. Before the name Sally Ann Bowman appeared on the front pages of newspapers, she was just an ordinary young woman, with dreams far bigger than the life around her. Born in 1987, Sally was the youngest of the Bowman family in Carshalton, South London, where she lived with her mother and 3 older sisters in a modest little house on Blenheim Crescent. From an early age, Sally caught people's attention with her striking height, bright smile, and confident eyes. She would cut pictures of models out of magazines and plaster them all over her bedroom walls, dreaming each night of one day stepping onto a catwalk under dazzling lights. Her mother, Linda, still remembered those nights when her youngest would lean against the doorway, clutching a pillow and smiling as she said, "One day, I'll make it. Everyone will know my name." Though her parents had divorced, the Bowman family remained close-knit. They lived simply, but the house was always full of laughter. Sally, the youngest, brought the most joy to the family. No matter how busy she was with school and part-time jobs, she never missed dinner at home. Those meals around the table were her chance to tell stories from school, from her friends, sometimes silly little things that had everyone bursting into laughter. At school, she attended the BRIT School, a well-known performing arts academy in Croydon. Friends and teachers remembered her as optimistic, sociable, and full of positive energy. She spoke about her dream without hesitation. "One day, I'll be on the cover of Vogue. I know I can." And true to her words, in 2005, Sally began taking her first steps into the modeling world. She signed with a local agency, appeared in ads for Swatch watches, and walked in the Alternative Fashion Week. Even though the modeling gigs were still small, Sally never lost heart. Friends said she still worked part-time at a hair salon, still rode the bus, still sipped bubble tea with her friends like any other teenage girl. Deep down, she was still just an 18-year-old with model photos covering her bedroom wall, believing it was only the beginning. No one could have imagined that her name would indeed be known throughout Britain, but not in the way she had ever dreamed. Along with the first steps of her career, Sally's life was much like that of any other young woman, filled with joy, pressure, and the fluttering emotions of first love. Around this time, she met and began seeing Louis Sproston, a young man from Croydon. Their relationship started out gently, naturally, as if the two had known each other all along. Sally's friends said she was happy when she was with Lewis, and Lewis doted on her in return. But those sweet days didn't last. Slowly, tensions began to build between them, mostly fueled by suspicion, jealousy, and the usual strain of a young love. They argued more often, grew more distant, and eventually broke up. It wasn't a loud or messy breakup, but it left a void in Sally. Even after it was over, they kept in touch, texting, calling from time to time, as if neither of them really wanted to sever ties completely. On the outside, Sally carried on with her life, working, modeling, helping out at the hair salon, coming home for family dinners, meeting friends. But sometimes, standing alone in front of her mirror, there was a faint trace of thoughtfulness in her expression. Perhaps she was still thinking of Lewis, or perhaps she was simply contemplating the long road ahead, one she still believed she could walk. And so, on the night of Saturday, September 24th, 2005, Sally decided to go out with her sister Nicole and a group of friends, hoping to shake off those restless thoughts. They met at Lloyd's Bar, a crowded spot in central Croydon, where the music and lights were enough to drown out any lingering worries. The group arrived around 10 p.m., chatting, dancing, and laughing until after 1 in the morning. In the hours that followed, things began to unravel. Nicole got into a minor scuffle outside the bar, drawing the attention of police, which left Sally anxious. She wasn't sure whether to stay, go home, or find somewhere else to spend the night. Eventually, she called a taxi to a friend's house, but as soon as she arrived, she changed her mind. She pulled out her phone and dialed Lewis. There was a hint of hesitation in her voice when she spoke to him, mixed with something that sounded like quiet hope. Lewis agreed to pick her up. At around 2:20 a.m., he drove into central Croydon, picked Sally up, and took her back to Blenheim Crescent. In the car, the tension returned. They began arguing, just as they had so many times before. Each accused the other of betrayal, of being the one who had ruined what they once had. Lewis stopped the car outside Sally's house. She silently opened the door, stepped out, and shut it firmly behind her, without so much as a backward glance. On the empty street, the pale glow of the streetlights cast a faint yellow onto the cold pavement. Lewis's car drove off, leaving Sally alone, walking slowly up the path toward her door. In her mind, perhaps there was nothing left but the sound of her own heartbeat and the messy swirl of thoughts after their fight. She had no idea that, just a few dozen feet away, in the darkness, a pair of eyes was watching her every step. The moment Lewis's car faded into the distance at the end of the street, Sally continued her slow walk along the familiar pavement, unaware that the darkness was hiding a predator. A stranger had been standing there all along, watching her every move as she walked from the car to her front gate. To him, this was no coincidence. In his twisted mind, the next few minutes were the perfect opportunity to unleash all his sick desires on an innocent soul. As Sally neared the gate, he suddenly lunged from behind. The attack was so swift that she didn't even have time to scream. A large hand clamped tightly over her mouth, and a gleaming blade plunged deep into her neck and abdomen. Blood sprayed across her thin cardigan. She struggled weakly in terror, but the pain soon drained her strength. When she collapsed onto the cold concrete, he crouched over her and raped her right there, regardless of whether she was already dead or barely clinging to life. When he was finished, he rifled through her handbag, taking her phone, her cardigan, and a few small belongings. Everything happened in an eerie silence, with only the sound of the wind and his fading footsteps as he disappeared into the night, as though he had never been there. The street remained as quiet as before. No one heard a thing. No one came outside. Only Sally's body lay there, motionless beside the garbage bin, blood pooling around her, soaking slowly into the dull gray ground. Around 6 a.m., a neighbor came out to walk her dog. She froze as she spotted a dark red streak trailing across the pavement. And then her eyes landed on a pair of pale legs sticking out of the shadows. A scream ripped through the calm morning air, waking the entire street. Police arrived quickly and cordoned off the scene. The photographs taken that morning are still preserved. A young woman lying on her side by the walkway, her clothes disheveled, her body covered in stab wounds, her face still bearing a faint look of shock. Investigators crouched down, placing numbered evidence markers next to each bloodstain, each footprint. And on the cold gray brick wall, the blue and red lights of the patrol cars flashed, casting fleeting colors over a street no one had paid much attention to before. In those first hours, the police focused on the only person they knew had been there that night, Louis Sproston. He was arrested the same day and brought in for questioning. He admitted they had argued before she got out of the car, but insisted he had driven away immediately after and never came back. Hours of interrogation passed, and Louis repeated the same story. When the DNA results from the scene came back, the police were forced to let him go. The semen found on Sally's body did not match him. So who did this? All they had was an unidentified DNA profile. It didn't match anyone in the National Criminal Database. In the days that followed, the press ran headline after headline, portraying Sally as a bright, beautiful young woman whose future had been stolen in a brutal act. The Croydon community was shaken, and the Bowman family was consumed by grief. And then, the case fell into a terrifying silence. For months, the police made no further progress. Somewhere out there, a cold-blooded stranger still walked free, as if he had vanished into thin air. For 9 months after that fateful night, every lead seemed to dissolve into nothing. The unidentified DNA profile of the attacker sat quietly in storage, like a puzzle piece no one knew where to place. The police kept combing through new names added to the system, but every result came back the same cold words: no match. Meanwhile, the Bowman family sank deeper into grief. Linda rarely left the house for weeks, and Sally's father avoided reporters, unwilling to see his daughter called a victim on the front page. The little house on Blenheim Crescent became the kind of place people walked past quickly, glancing only for a moment before turning away. The Croydon community had been shaken, but eventually, even that quieted. The bouquets, the cards, the candles left on the doorstep dwindled with time, leaving behind only a few wilted flowers gathering dust. The case was slowly buried under newer headlines, and people whispered to each other, "Maybe they'll never catch him. Maybe he's already gone." And then, on a summer night in 2006, fate intervened, in a way no one expected. A fight broke out at a pub in Croydon. Shouting, glass shattering, chairs overturned. Police were called to the scene. In the chaos, they arrested a large man, a cook at the pub, Mark Dixie. He didn't resist, just hung his head, and muttered something no one could quite make out. As a matter of routine, he was brought back to the station and swabbed for DNA like every other suspect. Officers filled out paperwork, filed the record, stamped the forms. No one thought much of it. Someone even joked, "Just another drunk." But 3 days later, the crime lab called the lead investigator directly. The voice on the other end dropped to a low tone. "You're going to want to hear this. It's a match. 100%. Immediately, Mark Dixie's file was pulled, and when they read through his record, a chill ran through the room. Mark Dixie, 35, had been arrested multiple times in both England and Australia. His rap sheet stretched from assault to burglary to sexual violence. A true sexual predator, but never locked up long enough to stop him. He drifted constantly, switching jobs, moving towns, like a wolf stalking the night, always looking for his next victim. That night, drunk and high, he'd wandered aimlessly through the quiet streets of Croydon. And then he saw Sally, a young, beautiful girl walking alone through the stillness of the night. To him, it wasn't a coincidence. It was destiny. That very night, after the match was confirmed, police planned his arrest. This time, there would be no pub, no crowd to shield him. They waited as he left his shabby room, heading down the alley behind the kitchen where he worked night shifts. As he lit a cigarette, they moved in. Mark Dixie was pinned down in seconds. He didn't resist, didn't speak, just gave a faint, crooked smile. In his eyes was something cold, something hollow, as though he'd always known this day would come. His trial took place nearly 2 years later at the Old Bailey. The courtroom was packed with reporters and curious onlookers. He entered wearing a gray prison jacket, his eyes still devoid of emotion. On the stand, he admitted to having sex with Sally's body at the scene, but brazenly claimed that when he found her, she was already dead or dying, and he simply couldn't help himself. A grotesque, twisted defense that left the room silent. The jury needed only a few hours to reach a unanimous verdict. Mark Dixie was guilty of murder. The judge handed down a life sentence with a minimum term of 34 years. When the sentence was read aloud, Mark Dixie just bowed his head in silence. The Bowman family sat quietly in the back row, their eyes wet, but their faces finally free of despair. After nearly 2 years, justice had at last arrived. After the sentence was handed down, the courtroom slowly emptied. The media covered the story heavily for a few more days, printing headlines with Mark Dixie's bowed head in the dock, and photos of Sally smiling brightly in her modeling shots, now a symbol of a stolen future. But as with all stories, the news cycle moved on, and people began to forget. For the Bowman family, time could not erase the pain. In a rare interview, Linda Bowman once said, "That pain never goes away. It just sits there quietly, and then it comes rushing back every time I see a young girl on the street, or every night when this house feels so empty." On what would have been Sally's 21st birthday, her family and friends held a small memorial in central Croydon, outside the Primark store where she used to shop for pretty dresses. They brought bunches of pure white balloons, each marked with her name, and released them into the sky. The balloons drifted and spun, fading into the gray-blue morning sky, much like her youth, fragile but never forgotten. In the aftermath of the case, debates flared in the UK over whether to establish a national DNA database. Detective Inspector Stuart Cundy, who led Sally's case, said, "If we'd had a national DNA system, we'd have caught him in 24 hours, not almost 2 years." But the proposal quickly met resistance, caught between privacy concerns and the desire for better tools to stop men like Mark Dixie before they strike. Even so, Sally's case left a mark, not just for its brutality, but for the questions it raised, about the fragility of youth, about how society protects its most vulnerable, and about justice. Even when delayed, it must still arrive. Sally's grave, carved with the words, "In loving memory," became a quiet place where many stopped by. Not just family and friends, but strangers who had never met her came to lay flowers, or simply to stand in silence for a while. Some said that, on certain late afternoons, you could still spot a few white balloons tied to the fence, drifting lightly. A gentle reminder that Sally's dreams and her story are still floating somewhere above the skies of Croydon.